Okay, I'm Martha Jackson Jarvis, and the name of the exhibition is What the Trees Have Seen Too. Place is very important to me. As I say, that's the first thing I do. I come in and ask, where am I? You know, where am I in the universe? I think of it in terms of universality, and then down to the minute scale of things. So I'm always drawing from really large scale to small intimate space and how to engage that. Usually my sense of scale is based on it's the natural environment because it's just expansive. But at the same time, I try to incorporate a human scale. What is it that we can see? How far is our peripheral vision? You know, I'd like to oftentimes create pieces that encompass your entire vision point. And then as a viewer, you get to travel into and around. I'm asking you to enter the piece, right? And it becomes really important to me how you transverse the surface, or if it's three-dimensional, how you travel around it, how you interact with space. It was a major discovery for my family and personally that, you know, I didn't know who Luke Valentine was or had ever heard the name. And my brother, who's kind of the archivist of the family, you know, he does history and research, discovered, you know, that Luke Valentine had fought in the Revolutionary War. Well, that was startling to me, for it to be so familiar and so close, yet so far away. So again, close to me in terms of genetics and history and family history, but far away in terms of the complexity of how history is told, whose history is told, and that sort of thing. And my first step toward discovering and knowing Luke Valentine was to take it to the studio and say, what is that parallel between what I do every day and what Luke Valentine did to be a free African man of African descent and fight in the Revolutionary War? So I tried to envision not just the geopolitical context that he was working in, but what was the internal landscape of this human being to travel from Virginia to North Carolina to fight the British and lost a lot of the other soldiers and died, but the survivors marched on to South Carolina, joined another South Carolina line and fought another battle, won. And then, of course, he had to go back home. So it was this also my knowledge or my memory of the southern landscape, having grown up there in a short period of my time, my life. I could imagine that landscape that was part of my being is being a part of his being. So again, crossing time and finding meaning within the place where we are now. There's something we consider ourselves so contemporary, and at the same time, we're ancient, right? So I felt this great reach across time. Will I continue? It does continue. It doesn't end. It doesn't end for me. It doesn't end for you. It doesn't end for you. There's a story. There's a narrative that weaves its way through humanity and through the environment that we have created. I mean, just on the train ride, you see all the ancient left behind relics along the train tracks, and steel and decay and new construction. It's all happening simultaneously. So the narrative never ends. In finding a way to address both what's ancient and contemporary and what's futuristic. So for me, that's the draw. Will it continue? The story never quite ends. And there's always new discoveries. Yeah. So for me, history is always important. That notion of narrative, right? And I try not to be illustrative in my work, but at the same time, there's always a narrative. Again, in this great awakening that's starting to happen among humanity in terms of how we embrace each other, acknowledge whose history really gets repeated, whose history gets lost. All of those questions are being raised in our lifetime. So my work becomes more pressing. I feel a level of urgency in order to get the idea that we're stewards of the planet, right? And that our destinies are so linked to how well the animals do, how healthy the water is, how pure the air is, if the birds are well, if the insects are present. We're not separate. So for me, this rubric of life, our part in it should be positive, not just on the destructive side. You either go on the plus side or the negative side. And it's now time to decide which side of that equation you will function on every day. So that's the complexity for me. And there's an urgency to how to voice, how to invoke the oneness of life, of materials, even inanimate objects, to feel an affinity to a rock, a stone, a shell. Nothing is unimportant, that it's all part of this formula of life. And we're just a little minuscule thing. So I'm rooting for the earth, I'm rooting for the animals, I'm rooting for the water and the air. And hopefully, as humans, we will have the sense and tenacity and strength enough to pull back on some of the tyranny against the earth, the materials, and each other. So I'm interested in how we begin to read space and surface and materials and each other. We began to create an environment of how we perceive the environment around ourselves. And usually I ask myself a question: where am I on Earth? My place on Earth right now as I'm working or as we're sitting. And you can't begin on this continent until you say where you are. I try to bridge what's ancient and then what's futuristic. And there's all this distance in between. So I try to work within those spaces. The Luke Valentine project was very, I would say different, but again, the narrative, but my narratives are never so finite that there isn't room to include, right? It isn't so specific in a way. There has to be room for discovery, room for people's identity and notions of experimentation. There's a level of energy that happens. And I think if that's the one word I would apply to all of my works and the way that I work, it's about energy. It's about capturing it and somehow encoding, the symbols, the energies, the colors, the patterns, the scale, all of those things become conduits for directing energy.